Welcome to this latest edition of the Cranky Curmudgeon's Corner. My name is Paul Thomas, and this episode we are going to be discussing spirituality versus organized religion. Joining us tonight in this discussion is Thaddeus Paulhamus and Doug Heinrichs. Let's start our discussion with your belief of what is the most beneficial to an individual's overall mental and emotional health. Is it membership in an organized religion or addressing one's personal spiritual aspects, such as reflection, personal growth, positive relationships, etc.? Now, Thaddeus, before we started, you said that there was, part of this question or another question that related to this question as to, is religion a benefit? So I'm just going to let you go first, and you go ahead and expound on what you were thinking there.
Okay. Well, the question that I want to ask is organized religion of use to anyone, of use to an individual? And I've thought about that and concluded that almost any religious body provides a set of rules for an orderly and virtuous life. At its best, a religion, or more precisely, being raised in a religion, can provide a framework for the individual from where they can begin to develop into a benefit to society and a self-respecting person. Those beginnings can, of course, emerge without a religious affiliation, but it seems that very often that the, learning the various teachings and commandments and everything of a religion get a person started into, looking at themselves in an orderly and logical way. In that way, religions, religious organizations provide a service to their people. Now, personally, I think that the latter part of your question is, applicable to me. That I find now that a more personal approach to spirituality means more to me and is more helpful to me than going to church and saying prayers and stuff like that. But on the other hand, I sometimes think that a lot of the way I think stems from the early indoctrination that I got as a kid going to Catholic school. So there's some good to it. I know that we are going to go on through these questions to talk about some of the ills that come of it as well. But I just wanted to start out by saying something good about organized religion.
Okay, Doug, Thaddeus makes a good point, and I think all three of us, even four of us, including our producer here, has spent like the first 18 years of our life in a structure that was pretty much established by organized religion, as Thaddeus outlined there for us. So you were, now you're retired, in the business of keeping people healthy from a emotional and mental standpoint. So what do you feel about the whole deal about organized religion?
I mean, I think Thaddeus makes a point, obviously, that the early teaching of an ethic is useful. My problem is I don't think that has anything to do with religion intrinsically. I think the Judeo-Christian tradition hijacked ethics. Before that, you go to ancient Greek thought and polytheistic systems. Ethics was a system that had nothing to do with religion. It was a system of how to live a good life. And it was indoctrinated into people, but you didn't need some notion of God and reward and heaven and hell to do it. I think we all need to be indoctrinated as children into good behavior. Uh, but I don't think that needs to be religious. And I think the religious dimension usually just messes it up. I think it introduces more negatives. If you just took the religion part out and taught the ethical code, I think you'd have a much better thing. So I don't think it's religion. I think religion just sort of hijacked ethics in the Judeo-Christian tradition and said you can't be a good person if you don't buy the whole religious shtick. Uh, and I think that's just bunk. So that's one thing. Now, having said that, I mean, I also think on the other side of the question, I mean, I do think that for myself, and I think for most people, and what data is out there in the literature, that some spirituality, whether that is in the context of an organized religion or not, tends to be good for mental health. That just seems to be the case. Now, I think that's tricky though, because my thing is, to me, what distinguishes spirituality, and of course, it's a slippery idea, so I guess everybody has
Sure, sure.
I think what distinguishes it is that it's addressing the world, the universe, some part of the world without self-interest, not from a prudential point of view, not what can I get out of this, but accepting and appreciating it. It's almost an aesthetic thing. It's like appreciating the sublime, the beautiful, the moving for its own sake without any reward to us. And if you pay too much attention to what good spirituality does for you, I think you stop being spiritual after a while. It's you have to be very careful about that, I think. You know, because to me, there aren't like there's some spiritual things and unspiritual things. I think spiritual is best used as an adverb, not an adjective. You can approach anything spiritually if you look at it in a disinterested way where you're just appreciating its existence for its own sake and reveling in that, and you're not getting anything out of it. I mean, you can see a painting you like. If you buy that painting because it moves you and you want to have it hanging in your house so that you can be moved by that painting, you're approaching it spiritually. If you're buying it because you think it's an up-and-coming artist and it's a good investment, you're not approaching it spiritually. Same piece of art, right? And I think that's true whether you're looking at a sunset, whether you're thinking about the cosmos, that to me, it's the disinterestedness, the fact that there's nothing in this for me other than the power of the experience of appreciating this piece of creation, reality, whatever it is.
Okay, let me go into like some of the things that both of you said in order to get some clarity on one particular thing that Thaddeus started out saying, and that is the structure of society that organized religion has provided for us. You know, we all came from Catholic parishes, and I know in my hometown, everything was centered around the church. All the activities, the parochial school that most of the town went to, the church picnic, the gathering of community. And Doug, you seem to develop the thought that structure, that social structure, doesn't really have anything to do with religion. It has more to do with the way that society was already structured, and religion was just a minor attribute of that. Is that what you're saying there?
Essentially, I think in reality, because religion became so dominant, it did do the organizing, but that's just an accident. I think the organizing would have happened anyway. I think there would have been other things around which communities would form, other things that would dictate a moral code and a code of good behavior and being a decent human being. I think religion's not required for that. And so I think sometimes it does do that, but I think it's essentially a hijacking of other social processes that would be there anyway.
Okay, Thaddeus, I kind of agree with what Doug laid out there, but you started this as far as laying that out. So I'm gonna let you finish up this question with the comment on what we've said so far.
Well, the next step that I'm hearing in the argument, if we want to call it an argument, is the what we're hearing from conservative commentators that we are, our society seems to be experiencing a breakdown in decorum, and they are laying that at the feet of an abandonment of organized religion. I think that's.
But I think we all believe that's bullshit, though, right? I mean,
It's
I believe that's bullshit. I think Doug believes it.
it's it's mostly bullshit, but it's it's bullshit because of its baggage. I think it's uh, there is the breakdown. More people are misbehaving. More people are ignoring. Uh, what we used to think were social norms, uh, and there doesn't seem to be any. There's no blowback against them for doing this, and it kind of makes life difficult for everyone. So
Who's misbehaving, though?
just more people, more kids are ignoring their parents and things like that. Uh, I'm going to hedge that a little bit and say,
Yeah, because I remember whenever I was a kid, I think I did a lot of misbehaving too.
yeah, well, I did a lot of misbehaving and you got a lot of whoopings for it.
Yeah, right.
But we don't do that, or we're told, or you mustn't whoop your kids. So I don't know whether a lack of religion, because at the same time, and I'm still working in the religion business, so I notice how many more empty seats there are than 5 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 50 years ago uh, in the churches. They aren't packing the punch that they used to, and then you know uh, you get cut off by somebody who, instead of just cutting you off in traffic, blows his horn and flips you the bird. The people are feeling much freer not to be nice to one another. So
Well, I think that could be behavior that is just the way our society is going, not necessarily because religion has anything to do with it.
yeah.
But moving on,
Yes.
how do you characterize prayer in terms of which bucket best defines it? Is it something that organized religion promotes as a control tool, or is the spiritual benefit one derives from praying the more prominent result? My mother prayed all the time. Anytime there was like a crisis down in the kitchen where like the kids were fighting with each other, she would just go upstairs to her bedroom and pray. So I do believe that she got some benefit out of it, but I don't know. Doug, what's your take on prayer?
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot of individuals who get obviously something important to them out of it. Okay. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I think it is fundamentally an instrument of organized religion. And again, it kind of gets back to my view of spirituality. That spirituality is about a disinterested appreciation of whatever you're appreciating. And the thing about prayer is, as usually conceived, prayer is asking for something, right? That's what it's used. Now, one can do a prayer of thanksgiving, and that's a different kind of experience. And that could be a spiritual experience. But most traditional prayer is asking for something. And I think at that point, you're just trying to influence the big guy up there to do it your way. And I see a couple problems with that. One is, if he's all powerful and all wise, and all-knowing, he already knows what he ought to do and is going to do. So praying is kind of silly. You're asking a infallible entity to change their mind. Doesn't make a lot of sense. The second thing is, so often what one is praying for is going to harm somebody else, right? So I want my kid to get into a good school, and I pray to God, well, somebody else is not getting into the good school if my kid gets in, right? So I'm asking God to take sides, which seems petty at least, right? So I think prayer in its traditional form doesn't have a lot to recommend it. Having said that, my mother is a prayer at 101 still, and she gets a tremendous amount out of it. And hey, why not?
Okay. That is prayer.
Boy, I think we were all cursed with pious mothers.
You do, huh?
That's
That's-
not a curse. That's not a curse. My mother was wonderful. She just,
my mother was wonderful, but sometimes she wasn't there because she was at church.
Ah,
Because she went to mass every day of her life, except for Good Friday when there was no mass.
that's right.
But anyhow, I think individual prayer can give an individual spiritual benefit, but it depends on what you call the prayer. Now, some people call prayer reciting paragraphs that begin with "O God" or "O Saint Francis" and end in "forever and ever, amen." And if you say a whole lot of them, then you're going to get brownie points with God or whatever saint you're praying to. That's, well, okay. If you do a lot of that, and you have a lot of ceremonies of prayer, of course, churches like to do that, that does have it has an ingredient of imposing or promoting social civic order. Okay, so if it promotes social civic order, maybe that's a good thing for society, but it really doesn't.
so what prayers do that? Any examples of prayers that?
Well, what I'm talking about is corporate prayer. Everybody goes to the church and they say vespers or they say mass, and that is, it is an orderly thing that people do together, and they get used to doing that thing together, and that supposedly has the effect of having people feel a commonality with each other, other congregants and things like that. So maybe it can promote that to some extent. I'm not going to say that it imposes it, but my own idea of prayer, and this may or may not have anything to do directly with God, is doing what you are doing and thinking what you are thinking with a positive attitude or with concentration, with focus. A lot of what prayer seems to do is focus your attention. If your attention is focused on God, I don't know what you're looking at, but you have one set idea that you're looking toward. This might be a good thing for you.
So isn't another name for what you're describing introspection or reflection, personal
Sure.
reflection?
Sure is.
Okay.
I will describe people, people don't see me making the sign of the cross and waving my rosary beads around and things like that. And I say, well, I'm working in a religious milieu and I'm playing music. And I say, well, I don't say, oh God, blah, 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 amen, a lot. But when my fingers are moving, I'm praying. That's just, I'm being who I am. And, that in itself is a form of prayer for me. It might not be for you, but, or the other people, but that's what it is for me. So that's a good thing. I feel good about myself when I am doing the the best of what I do.
So your artistic expression is, in your mind, one of the forms of prayer that is, very inspiring for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Sticking with prayer a little bit here on the next question. Does the belief that praying to a higher power, such as Jesus, Mary, or some other saint, in order to achieve some earthly benefit, as Doug alluded to earlier, such as recovering from an accident or illness, making more money, getting your kids into a better school, comport with the notion of a just God, or does it favor the concept that he likes more the ones who pray harder? Thaddeus, understand the
Well,
question?
I hope so. Uh, the idea of more prayers, that is, you're saying those paragraphs that end in amen, will bring better results, is an invitation, I think, to frustration and disillusionment. Because very often the things that we pray for are things that just don't happen. If I prayed that my kitty wouldn't die, it was really absurd because the doctor said the kitty had cancer and there was no cure for it, and he was on his way out. So, you know, praying, well, as Doug says, that an all-knowing God is going to change his mind is absurd. So, but uh, now that's for the formal prayers, the prayers in the prayer book. But focusing, and I think we talked about this a minute ago, uh, when your focus is outside of yourself, you are, you know, and if you want to focus on God, and when you say God, I think of that, Michelangelo's painting of the big old man with the gray beard, with his finger out, but that isn't necessarily what you need to be focusing on. You may be looking at a swath of society about whom you are concerned, and you may be focused on the beautiful sunset or some other thing. But if it is something that takes you out of your own navel gazing, that's kind of a worthwhile thing. But when it comes down to praying to a higher power, well, why do we have to say anything if God, if you believe God is in everything, God is everywhere, and God is in each one of us? And they even say it in a couple of religious lessons that God knows what you want before you say it. He doesn't need for us, God does not need for us to say this, I don't think.
Okay, Doug, you alluded to this earlier. So you don't believe that, that this prayer thing um, makes any sense as far as having an advantage. But
Right.
do other people maybe believe that the harder you pray, the more likely you're going to get what you're praying for?
Oh, sure. I think that's the position of traditional religion, and I think people buy into that. And it's again, it's prudential. It's sort of It's like putting more away for retirement. If you do that, then when retirement comes, you're going to have more. So if you pray more in this world, when the big retirement comes, you're much better off. So and as Thaddeus pointed out, one of the problems with prayer is most of our prayers don't come true in this world. So religion has two answers to that. One is there's another world and it's all going to be great, so don't worry. The other is God knows what's best, and it may not look great to you, but in the God's scheme of things, this is all for the best, right? There's a good reason God's doing this. You are just not wise enough to understand it. He's still doing the right thing for you. Just don't you worry about it. So, but that's, of course, there's absolutely no way to put that to the test. So it doesn't carry much weight in my mind. But I think Thaddeus's notion that what is good in prayer, or in a broader view of prayer, is getting outside of yourself, kind of fits with the notion I said earlier that, spirituality has a lot to do with just not being focused on self-interest, to be outside of yourself. So that and that's why it has so much to do with an aesthetic, it's so parallel to an aesthetic experience. So when Thaddeus is playing music, he's appreciating the music. He's kind of loses himself in that experience, I suspect. And it's a wonderful moment of spirituality. Not because it's religious music, by the way. I think you could have the same experience with a beautiful piece of secular music. It's the fact that you are not nasal gazing. You are totally focused on this piece of music, this aesthetic object.
And it doesn't have to be, as you say, it doesn't necessarily have to be religious music. It doesn't have to be hymns, although I'm doing a lot of work with them. I am going to be playing a very lovely arrangement of Here Comes the Sun on Saturday morning for an event. And, and that's a lovely tune. And it's, the song from years back.
George Harrison wrote.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's very, it's just this very, very lovely feel good thing. It makes everybody feel peaceful and happy, I think, and that's in a lot of things. And you can feel the glory in the Ode to Joy, Beethoven, and that was a poem by Schiller that was not a religious hymn, but it is a hymn to joy itself. So those spiritual things happen in music in many, many different ways. And I can hear something that moves me just about every time I turn the radio on.
Getting back to this idea about God, which Doug alluded to earlier, how does the concept that God is within us line up with the idea that he's an external deity with the power to shape everything in the universe? Are they contradictory notions, or can there be some overlap that a congregant worshiper can feel comfortable believing? If I have this power within me, and I say God is within me, and I'm doing good things because God is within me, what about the idea that somebody from the outside has the power to change the universe and has all the good that's outside, and everything in the universe is done according to his will? Is that a contradictory notion, or is there some overlap? Doug, what do you think about that?
Well, I don't think it has to be a contradictory notion. I think many forms of pantheism embrace the notion that God is part of the universe and everything is part of God, so that we are, but there's also a God outside. So I think it doesn't have to be. The Stoics, long before Christian philosophy emerged, or shortly before it emerged, had a view that we, by virtue of our capacity to reason, we share in the rationality of the universe. So, I mean, there are all kind of philosophical positions that allow to unite the two. I personally think you can have God within you and there not be any other God out there, just what we have in us, which is kind of my view of the matter. But I don't think it's incompatible in theory. I think you can put the two together if you choose to embrace that kind of a belief system.
Thaddeus, you see a merging of those two beliefs?
Yeah,
the within and without?
Yeah, I have I've lived with that, those two perhaps competing ideas have lived in my mind all my life. So I'm really not uncomfortable with the idea that, if there is a God out there, pulling the levers of power, and a God in me, and I think the nicest illustration of that is actually in a Christian assertion that uh, we are, we people doing the best we can are the hands of God. And, I developed that while I was working with the Christian Scientists who believe in sitting back and saying prayers and waiting for Jesus to do it all. And then you go into the rotunda of the Johns Hopkins Hospital where they have this 27-foot statue of Jesus, and he's called Christ the Healer. Well, he's just a statue in that point, but there are a whole lot of very, very well trained hands working around in that building to heal people. And if Christ is healing people, he is healing people through the work of us mere human beings. So here's the God that moves everything, and here are the people that actually make the physical thing happen. So they are two concepts that work together, I think, reasonably well.
Okay, especially within you.
All right, right.
I have some problems that I'm going to have you guys help me out with right now. And I think the biggest issue I have with the monotheistic deity concept is that God is not primarily a figure who loves and cares for all his children, but rather a cranky old narcissist whose only demand is that we worship and adore his glory or face eternal damnation for not doing so. Now, I know not everybody believes that, but many, many people do. Is it safe to say that spirituality rejects the idea of the mean old man, whereas organized religion embraces it for reasons for that fear is a control factor? Thaddeus, you get what I'm saying here?
Yeah, and I am pretty much on board with you on most of that. Uh, and I would just stick in here a little quote that I have seen recently several times, and that is a spiritual person strives to do what is right, regardless of what he's told, and a religious congregant does what he's told, regardless of what is right.
Boy, there couldn't be a more truer statement than what you just said there, buddy. Yeah, I'm fully down with that.
Now, what do you
Yeah,
think, Doug?
anything to add beyond that
No,
quote?
no, I'm good with it.
That pretty much says it all. Doug,
Yeah,
the mean old man.
yeah, I think that's right. I think that and I think, frankly, just as an aside, I think one of the reasons evangelicals can so rally around as immoral man as Donald Trump is his personality is exactly like Yahweh's. They're narcissistic, demand unreasonable tests of loyalty, punish people who cross them no matter what. Kill your enemies. That's the Old Testament God. That's
Hey,
Donald.
with Abraham, it was like slice your son up.
Slice your kid up, right? You could see Donald Trump doing that to somebody as a loyalty test, right? I mean, so I think that, yeah, I think that's what it amounts to, and I think it is a very controlling thing. I mean, I think the whole notion, and I think, from my way of thinking, I think our view of God evolved historically as an extension of people's view of secular rulers. So we call him Lord, right? He's the Lord of the manor, right? And secular rulers were powerful, narcissistic people who could squash you if you didn't do what you were told. And I think the traditional view of God is simply a extrapolation from human social arrangements in a time of, kings and emperors and, tyrannical rulers, which is most of human history. So it follows from that. I think that's absolutely right.
So what we saw in the alpha of our society we projected that to be how God was.
Yeah, God is just the mega alpha, he's really the big boy. And I think this notion of thinking for yourself as a spiritual person, and this is something that goes way back pre-Christian, one of the Platonic dialogues, I think the Euthyphro, where Socrates is asking the question, is something good because God tells you to do it, or does God tell you to do it because it's good? And it's the same challenge, isn't it? Is it just that God's got the power, and if he says do X, sacrifice your only son for me, that's the good thing to do?
Are heaven, hell, purgatory, and limbo real destinations or more tools in the control box? If any of you have done any studies on Martin Luther, this is a good spot to share what you have learned. Doug, what do you know about Martin Luther and the reason why he put those things nailed that on the church?
Yeah, well, I think Martin Luther probably had a very clear obsessive compulsive disorder, right? So Martin Luther could never be good enough to buy into the Catholic view that good works are what get you to heaven. He could never be comfortable he was going to get there because he just couldn't be perfect enough, right? And in his despair, in his psychological breakdown, basically, he hit upon, in the Gospel of Paul, this notion that freed him from all that worry. It's just all about faith, and it's in God's hands, and God will save some of us and not save others. So the pressure's off. Relax. And I think that's what made it personally appealing to Luther. And I think it's what makes that view personally appealing to a lot of people is that, the pressure's off, and I know so many, quote, born again Christians who have lived horrible lives, but think they've got it made because at some point they found Jesus. Now they're okay. They're golden. Now, I think Luther it appealed in a large part because Catholicism had become so incredibly cynical, so that it was, the selling of the indulgences, the whole shebang. So it was so blatantly self-serving of do this, do that, and you'll, line my pockets and we'll make sure you get to heaven. And that all of your people you love will get to heaven if you line my pockets sufficiently. So I think that, he hit on something that was just ripe for the picking. But it really did grow out of his own personal neuroses. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. That's how it happened. And now the interesting thing is, of course, Protestantism started with a kind of spiritual ideal that it's your relationship with God. Reject organized. You don't have to listen to a priest. You don't have to have somebody else interpret it to you. It took no time at all for Protestant religions to become as rigid, as doctrinaire as Catholicism ever was. So I think that's an interesting object lesson. I think it's just what happens in religions. I don't think they can stay spiritually pure very long.
Well, the thing about indulgences, I thought, was a really big motivating factor for Luther, because the corruption that he saw was the selling, the belief that if you give the church money, you're going to spend less time in purgatory, and you're going to go to heaven quicker. So hand over the money, and you're golden. So Thaddeus, my mother had all these little prayer cards for us, and she wanted us to read. And at the bottom of it, it said, 300 days indulgence. So, if you do this novena or whatever. So that was up to pre-Vatican II, whenever I was reading these things. So what did you learn about indulgences from your upbringing? And do you still hold the belief about purgatory and limbo and all those things?
Well, first of all, about the indulgences, you get 300 days, you get a year, you get 500 days. Hey, let's cut to the chase. Just do the one that's a plenary indulgence. All out, Let's go for the gold.
Yeah. Right.
Now, as far as heaven, hell, purgatory, and limbo, well, we all like to think that there's going to be pie in the sky when you die. So heaven's a great idea. It's a motivator. Do good, you know, say your prayers, be nice to people, and maybe God's going to be merciful on you and forgive you your sins, and you're going to be happy forever. Well, it's just a nice thing to think about, especially when you're about to die. You say, oh, maybe I'm going to see my old grandmother again and we'll have a wonderful reunion, blah, 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 blah. Nice thought. Now, okay. Now, purgatory and limbo. Purgatory makes more sense to me. If there's going to be, if you've done bad things and you really need to pay a price for having done them, then purgatory makes more sense, because the sins that we commit here on earth are temporal. They only, they do not last longer than our lives. And so an eternal punishment for something that we did, especially Father Guido Sarducci's 25-cent sin, that, for a moment's pleasure, you're going to spend eternity in hell. Okay. So I can say, if we're going to have hell, let's have purgatory. That's temporary hell. And more likely, the one good thing that I can say about hell, because this is a totally emotional response. And it's my emotional response. And you, Doug, as a psychiatrist, can head shrink me about it all you want. But I've been watching for the last 10 years somebody getting away with everything but murder, and some people call it murder. And he never, ever faces any consequence for it. How can we not feel cheated by somebody doing horrible things, or more personally, doing horrible things to us and paying no consequence for it? And you say, well, at least when he dies, he'll probably go to hell. And that can make you feel a little better about being harmed or being cheated or being insulted or being whatever, in whatever way you have been wronged. So hell is, and for ourselves, hell maybe is a motivator. Well, don't do that. Don't murder your mother-in-law, because you'll probably go to hell forever, and it's not worth it. So, but heaven, hell, purgatory are all constructs of control. At the very end of it, they are to control what we decide to do. As far as the guy who ate the meat on Friday and is frying in hell now, they taught us in Catholic school that your intention is the sin. So if he intended to thumb his nose at God by eating that hot dog on Friday, then he was committing a mortal sin. He was cutting his soul off from contact with God, and that he intended to be permanent. But it was because he intended it to be permanent that it is permanent. He ain't never going to get out of there, I think. But if he just inadvertently forgot that it was Friday, I mean, we're retired. We forget what day of the week it is sometimes. I have a clock up there on the wall that just has one hand that tells me what day of the week it is. So if he just forgot, most likely he's not in hell. He might be in purgatory, though. And if they change the rule, then, hey, maybe he does get a reprieve and gets to go to heaven. I don't know. It's all in the ether out there somewhere. It's not here.
And I think that whole emphasis on intention, which is so much part of the Catholic view of sin.
Yeah.
adds to the effectiveness as a control tool. It's the ultimate mind control. It's like what every dictator would like to have, the ability to have a secret police inside everybody's head, so that you are absolutely exposed at every moment. Even if you don't act on it, if you have the wrong thought, you're in trouble, right?
One is a sin all by itself.
Ritualistic celebrations are ingrained in the human experience. Even the most spiritual spiritualists go through some type of methodic preparation in order to get to the desired meditative state. But the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox organizations have taken grandeur to extraordinary levels. Look no further than the hats these guys wear. Does all this pomp and extravagance provide much comfort and solace to the congregants in attendance? And if so, how much? Doug?
Well, I think we have to remember two things. One is that Catholicism is, of the Christian religions, the closest to paganism. It was the first one to emerge out of a pagan world, right? And religion in the pagan world was essentially a public thing. It was for the sake of the gods taking care of the community. It was much more that than about my personal fate. Because a lot of the pagans didn't even believe there was anything after death. I mean, it was about the community. So a big, impressive public display is kind of part of the shtick. And then I think what Catholicism did with the sacramental system is introduce the notion that we are the sole pathway to grace, that you are not going to get saved unless you belong to this organization, go through the system. And so making the system look grand, making it look, and again, if you think of religion as just, and God is just a mirror of secular rulers, it's the same idea of a secular ruler who wants to come across as powerful and wealthy and having it all and having all. So the fancy stuff, I think it's part of a great display. Now, I think in our modern world, it doesn't work as effectively as it used to. And
why is that?
Well, I for the same reason that people don't dress up anymore. I think there is a great leveling attitude in our current American culture that everybody's supposed to look pretty much the same, and you just don't, dressing up fancy is no longer seen as cool in any circumstance, right? You wear jeans to the opera, wear jeans to the symphony, fine. So I think these guys who are still dressing up in these get-ups start to look progressively silly to the modern world. So I don't think it's as effective as it used to be. But I think for much of, just as the buildings, the great cathedrals, I mean, it's just part of the same shtick now. That they had people in awe, the beauty of these buildings and the majesty of them, right? So it was all part of creating that impression. And I just don't think it's as effective as it used to be, but I think that's why it's there.
So the reason is still control, though.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Propaganda, essentially.
Yeah. Thaddeus, the grandeur of it all.
Yeah. Well, I'm hearing a lot of what Doug says, and I'm kind of expounding off to the side of it. There's some sort of grandeur. We think of eternity as a grand thing, and I think that a lot of liturgy, the art, the architecture of the Greek cathedrals and everything are intended to evoke this sense of immenseness, of grandeur, and if you ever heard the echo in Notre Dame de Chartres, it's like an echo that goes on for eternity, So we have that idea, and going and standing in the middle of this, or sitting in your pew if you're in an American church, and watching the grand pompous, whatever, go on, gives you or gives some people a sense that they are belonging to something, they are attached to something that is bigger and greater than they are, and that can be kind of an emotional pull. They may feel ennobled by this. Um, Now, parenthetically, I have a friend who is inordinately proud to be a congregant at the National Cathedral. And that's as close as Americans can get to the Vatican. Um, and also, just along the same lines, I saw a recent photo of a gathering, a rather large gathering of bishops in which they were all vested in matching white vestments and matching pure white, very tall mitres. And I had to look twice to make sure that I wasn't looking at a Klan meeting. But it wasn't a Klan meeting. There were no tiki torches.
They did have some candles, though. There had to be some candles. So.
Oh, they have
Oh, yeah,
candles,
candles.
but not tiki torches.
Okay. There's a difference then.
Yeah.
Saudi health officials reported 1,301 pilgrims attempting to attend this year's Hajj in Mecca died due to heat-related conditions. Is this a sufficient wake-up call for Islamic authorities to put a leash on this deadly ritual, or does the need to maintain religious traditions override common sense? Another example we can talk about, health-wise, is receiving communion during the COVID pandemic. Is this going to be something that they care about or not? Thad?
I sort of have the feeling that they are not going to stop having the Hajj. At some time in the future, they might consider moving the event to some place at a more temperate climate than Saudi Arabia, because it's always hot there. Now, the one thing that we have to kind of hedge ourselves on is, since we come from a Christian tradition, the Hajj, although I believe every Muslim is expected to take part in the Hajj at least one time during his life. Right. So it is mandatory, and that's a control thing. But there are other things, there are other practices, and there have been practices within Christianity that have also been dangerous, such as the, I believe, Philippine tradition of having a volunteer get crucified on Good Friday. Usually they take him down before he's dead and get him medical attention, but it doesn't always work out that way. And then here in the US of A, in rural places, there are some nominally Christian congregations where they take part in ritualistic snake handling and poison drinking. And, these are pretty questionable. And of course, there are a number of Catholic saints who attained their reputation for holiness by mortification of the body of various kinds and of various levels of painfulness. So, but the thing that they all have in common is that at the end of it all, they are all voluntary. And if people volunteer to do these things that put them in danger, then I would say, why the hell are the religions teaching that they're virtuous things to do, but they are not being controlled into doing them? So it's not entirely a control issue, but it really makes you wonder what these churches are teaching.
Okay, Doug.
Well, I think, first of all, with respect to the hush, I think there'll be some token efforts to make it less dangerous, more air conditioning or something. But
Maybe shooting water,
yeah,
spraying water
something,
over.
spritzes, there'll be something. But I don't think it's going to fundamentally change. And I think the real issue with most religions in the monotheistic tradition is that life on this earth isn't that important anyway. So if you die in the process of a pious act, if you essentially are a martyr, and that's a good thing, right? You know, the mortification tradition in Christianity arose right when the the martyring of Christians stopped. It's like you got to come up with something else now to replace martyrdom. Uh, you know, the pagans aren't putting us to death anymore. So by God, we've got to come up, find some other way to prove that we're willing to die for the faith. So you
And
do,
doesn't that go back to paganism and sacrifice?
yeah. Well, Christ, right? I mean, he's the
Right,
model of sacrifice,
right,
right? I mean, he was a
right.
pagan sacrifice. I mean, there's not a whole lot of difference between Christ as martyr, Christ as sacrifice, and what you see in paganism, where sacrificing to the gods for the removal of our sins. Christianity put this funny little twist where the sacrificer and the recipient of the sacrifice are both God in some curious arrangement. But the basic understanding is the same, right? Christ died for our sins. You know, he's going to save us by being made a sacrifice. So I think the whole notion of sacrificing your life for whatever your view of what God wants, is deeply embedded in religions. And so if you do something dangerous and you happen to die, that's not so tragic. You know, you go to heaven, you know, you get your 70 virgins or whatever happens, and you're good to go. I think you know, it's ironic to me that for all of the Christian and Catholic protests about abortion and the sacredness of human life. Once somebody's born, their life doesn't count for much in the religious tradition anymore. You know? Then it's like to hell with you now. You're not that important. You know, you made it out of the birth canal, so it doesn't matter what happens to you anymore.
One thing organized religions clearly have over strict spiritualism is the development of community generally centered around a specific building or campus. After 5,000 or so years of organizing people around the foundations of a faith in deities, has it worked out as a benefit to mankind, or would you say it has done more harm than good? Doug, I think you alluded to this earlier.
Yeah, I think that obviously a sense of community is useful in many ways. Now, there's a downside to a sense of community because whenever you have a strong sense of community, you also have a strong sense of who are the people, who are the other, who are the people who are not part of our community. And often there's tremendous hostility and mistreatment towards them. So it's a two-edged sword. But more fundamentally, it so happens historically that religions have played an important role in being the center of these community structures. But I don't think that's necessary. I think if religion weren't there, other things would have organized those community structures. Um, you know, you look at the tremendous devotion of the Greek polis to the city state and so forth. Religion played a minimal role there. There are some, but it's not like it does in the Judeo-Christian tradition. So I think you need a sense of community. I think without that, we're a social species. Um, so you need that. I think you would have that whether religion were around or not. It would just be something else. And I think the problem with religion is you tend to demonize the people who aren't in your club.
Yeah, and I think in the early civilizations, they gathered around rivers, and that ended up being more economically uh, a basis of their foundation than religious.
Right.
So Thaddeus, community, and fact that these monotheistic deities have been centered around the church or the campus.
Oh boy, you're asking a guy from the town where it's happening. I find just in the last couple of weeks, watching the news, it's a real bender here in Baltimore, uh, that the church that worships a God who is everywhere, even inside of each one of us, could at the same time engender such a fanatical sense of attachment to a building. Now, as the Archdiocese of Baltimore prepares to padlock about 30 Baltimore City churches, all on December 1st, just in time for everybody to be unhappy on Christmas, uh, there's an outcry among the adherents who have known that this plan was in the works for the last 3 years, and the complaint is, they're taking away my church. Now I'll have no place to pray. What a dichotomy. God is everywhere, but they're going to padlock this building, and I can't pray to God anymore because that building is locked. Now, you can hear in the city Catholic churches of America, maybe in Europe, I don't know, but in America, I place the blame on the teachers in parochial schools and Sunday schools, the teachers in earlier generations who taught their kids, and I was one of those kids who heard this. I heard it right from Sister's mouth, that they hadn't satisfied their Sunday obligation to attend Mass if they attended with friends or relatives at a neighboring parish. You ever hear that before?
No, I haven't.
Well, you grew up in a little town that had one Catholic church,
That's exactly right.
but there are 60 Catholic churches in Baltimore, and sometimes they're 2 or 3 blocks apart. Now, it's no wonder that people wound up thinking that God could only be found in my church. So, luckily for others, others than Catholics, this seems mostly endemic to this religion and in urban areas. However, most every Western religious group claims at some level absolute ownership to all the truth, whether it be theological or otherwise. And that, I think, is the source for a never-ending battle for hegemony that has spilt oceans of blood for thousands of years. And it's going on right now, today, in many places in the world, even here.
Okay.
So
And I
much
think,
more harm than good. Short answer.
Okay. Go ahead, Doug.
yeah, just add to that part of this, and what Thaddeus is alluding to, is that religions tend to develop this notion of there being a sacred space that
Yeah.
our group has special rights to, whether that is a holy land, whether that is our local church, as if that space has something special to do with God, rather than God's with us all, if there is one. So, as Thaddeus points out, why should you need to worry about this building, or for that matter, this holy land, and kill lots of people to defend it? It's just kind of a very strange view of the matter.
Okay, you guys perfectly segued me into the next question, which happens to be pretty political. Has the influx of Orthodox influence in the current coalition governing Israel in terms of West Bank settlements, military operations in Gaza, and the general treatment of Palestinians overall helped or hurt the process of peaceful coexistence with Jews and Arabs? There's a lot of rabbinical influence in the Knesset right now, Doug. And
Well, I think, and my own feeling is that every organized religion has an ultra Orthodox wing
Hmm.
or the equivalent, and they're all alike to one another. They're intolerant, they're absolutist, they're us versus them, they're combative, they're the battle of good and evil. And I think those attributes apply whether you're talking about the ultra Orthodox Jews, the evangelical Christians, the radical Islamists. They're all like one another. And I think it's sort of the most destructive aspects of organized religion condensed into a very vicious potent potion.
Yeah, and I think the way they treat women is just pretty common too.
Oh yeah, it's all the same, right?
Yeah. Right. Okay, Thaddeus. The influx of the Orthodoxy in the Jewish government, has it helped or has it made things worse?
Well, I think that it's made things worse, but I don't think that it's anything new. As far as I could see, the war in the land of Israel or Palestine or whatever we call that piece of property has been going on pretty much since the first day the first Jews landed there after World War II. There has never been a day of peace there. And
I think you can go all the way back to Moses taking the people from Egypt to that land as well.
oh, yeah, because I was going to allude to that. Uh, Somewhere in the Torah, there is a passage that says, go to the land of milk and honey. I give this to, God gave this to them. And they said, and when you get there, any people that are there, you tell them to leave.
Or,
And if
or
they
you
don't
kill them.
leave, kill them.
Right.
Right.
And I think that they are still trying to do that. Kill anybody that doesn't leave their God-given land.
Right.
I'm sorry, that's harmful.
Another problem I have, and you guys may have already concluded that I have lots of problems here, is the issue of certainty. While spirituality promotes the internal striving to achieve benevolence and growth, organized religion says there can be no disputing the word of God. It is God's way or the highway to eternal damnation. Most disturbing about this certainty is the fact that God didn't actually write this shit down. All of it was put to pen by men who claim to have been divinely inspired. Furthermore, these vague mystical sonnets are subject to the interpretation of the religious authorities who seek to use the script to impose the law they want at that time. Socrates said, the best way to find the truth is to keep asking questions. Who is right, Socrates or the religious belief in the certainty of God's law? Thaddeus?
Well, first of all, Paul, my old friend, you have more issues than the New York Times.
Ain't that the truth?
Well, anyway, don't ask Tomas de Torquemada. Although the Roman Catholic Church no longer burns dissidents at the stake, certainty and doctrinal purity is still the coin of the realm in Rome. And it's no wonder that the Christian faith has splintered into such an array of sects. And you thought I wasn't going to talk about sects.
I did not.
A couple of weeks ago, the quote liberal Pope got under my skin by instructing that LGBT plus people should not be eligible for the consecrated life or the priesthood. Apparently, it is presumed that we LGBTs are too morally weak to maintain the mandatory celibacy. And moral weakness is a statement of fundamental inferiority. or God did not create everybody equal. I'll side with Socrates on this one.
Okay, Doug.
Well, yeah, I think it's striking that the Catholic clergy before all the gender diversity didn't do such a great job of keeping their celibacy either. So, well, let's face it. But yeah, I mean, I think the problem is there is no certainty in life. And in this sense, Socrates is absolutely right. And so you either revel in that and enjoy the process of trying to approximate truth more and more as best you can and find that a satisfying prospect, or you have to latch on to some arbitrary explanatory system that gives you all the answers. And a lot of people just want the latter, and they're going to grab onto that. But it makes you totally at the mercy, as you say, of the people who are interpreting this. It's not like God has come down and said this directly. These are written by a bunch of guys along the way who have their own agenda, I mean, the New Testament Gospels were all written by people who never knew Jesus, right? So, I mean, that's questionable. Most of the Old Testament in the form we have it was written during the Babylonian captivity. So it was long after most of the events recorded. And it was their particular spin on it. So, it's obviously so utterly arbitrary, but people want to have answers handed to them. They want to feel there is certainty. And again, I think it goes back to the fact that religion, in addition to deriving from secular rulership, it also derives from the relationship of a young child to a parent. And, when we're little kids, we really can't handle the uncertainty of the world. And we really want to think that our parents have the answers. So when they tell us, we believe them. And it's only gradually that we start to realize our parents really aren't infallible and they're not all powerful and all knowing. They're not godlike. And we eventually come to that conclusion. But hopefully, in the meantime, we're developing some capacity to navigate the world on our own. So it's not so traumatic. But in the religious realm, it sort of got stuck there. We're still little kids, right? Wanting the answers from Big Daddy because the world is too big and scary for us to figure out. And I think for many people, that's a very, very appealing thing. And we're willing to be led around by the nose to feel that security.
Yeah, if I may cut in,
Sure.
that there is some emotional comfort in certainty.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes they just want the comfort of being able to say, yes, this is the truth. And you can take that to the bank.
Right.
And you don't have to worry about it anymore. And, I do love the idea of continuing to question. And the phrase from the Constitution that comes to mind is to form a more perfect union. Not to form a perfect union, nor is this document the outline for a perfect union, but for the approach to a more perfect union that we have to keep working at.
Right.
It's
Right.
loving the process. And Socrates claimed that what got him started was the Oracle of Delphi said he was the wisest man in the world. And he said, I can't be. I don't know much at all. And so he said he went about trying to find somebody wiser than himself. And after doing this and questioning people for a long time, he came to the conclusion that he was the wisest man in the world because he knew he didn't know anything. And all these other people thought they did.
Right, right. And he decided that the only way to go about it is to keep asking questions.
Right. And you're never going to get the certainty. I mean, it's not like he thought you would arrive. But there's something exhilarating in the process and something valuable in the process of doing it, just like working towards a more perfect union is a noble thing to do, even though we're never going to get there.
Right. Well, I couldn't have asked for a better group of guys, minor seminarians, us all.
There you are.
To discuss theology in the way we did. So We eventually got back to philosophy, which actually theology was the root of, was rooted in philosophy. So thank you, Doug, Thaddeus, for helping me get through something I really wanted to bring out for a long time. And I couldn't ask for a better group of guys to do it with. And all you out there in Cyberland, thanks for listening to this enlightened discussion. And until next time, we'll see you then. Bye now.